Hello everyone, today's poem is Xiaoya, 大田, a Xiaoya poem from the Book of Songs. This poem is one of the poems from the subchapter 福田之时, 10 poems of 福田. So you can imagine 福田 is the first poem in this subchapter 福田之时, the 10 poems of 福田. And this poem is the second poem in this subchapter. Actually, the title 大田 is with the same meaning with 福田. 大田 is quite simple on the surface, the big farming field, the ground farming field. 福田 is in the surface is a little different meaning. The farming field of a senior people, remember the term 福 is borrowed a long word of 福, which both means a very senior person. And but here they are referring to the same things. It has so many alternative names. If you read the classic literatures of the Zhou dynasty, 大田, 福田, 千亩, 吉田, and 阡陌. So it has so many alternative names, refers to the same things, which basically means the farming field belongs to the Lord. And normally 大田, 吉田most of the time refers to the farming field belonged to the king of Zhou. So just imagine the society, the country of Zhou is by the laws, the most biggest lord is the king of Zhou, and under him there's a lot of the laws of state's lord, and all of them have their farming fields, and which was basically assigned by the king of Zhou. And the king of Zhou has the most big piece of land surrounding the capital area, and the state laws of course have their own farming fields around their cities, their capital cities of the state. And under the state laws there also has some junior laws and belonged to the state's laws. So this is a leveled society with hierarchy. It was told that the king of Zhou has a farming field with the size of 1,000 mu. 1 mu equivalent roughly 666 square meters. So the king of Zhou has 1,000 mu of land, and the state lord has 100 mu of farming field. Of course, the junior lords has much a smaller size of the farming field. So this the Zhou society is a very hierarchy society. There's a saying that the setup of the land is like this picture, which was so called as 井田 in Chinese, because the character 井 is with the same shape as this setup. The land in the center belongs to the king, and all the other 8 pieces of land belongs to the citizens of Zhou or the junior lords of Zhou under the king. It is the duty of those people who has the 8 pieces of land to do the job for the king first, before they plant, do the farming work on their own farming field. Anyhow, more and more evidence today doesn't prove this setup. Most likely, the king of Zhou has a very big piece of land, very big piece of farming field. It not necessarily surrounded by other 8 pieces of land. Or the king may have several very big pieces of land scattered surround the capital area, and which was also not necessarily surrounded by other 8 similar pieces of land, like the picture. There are many poems in the Book of Zhang writing about farming work, about farming field, about harvest. And the most famous poem is 冰风七月, the Bin Wind, July. And it is a very good reference to this poem as well. And why there's so many poems about farming work, about farming field? Because it's very, very critical to the king, to the Zhou country. First thing first, the farming field is where the Zhou people to make their living on. And this tradition extended to the Qing dynasty even. If there is a very, very bad harvest, and very likely there will be a famine. People would die by hunger. And secondly, the society was constructed upon the activities of farming, which was the term 吉田 comes from. So the farming work for the king's land was organized by the central government, by the most high-level officer, 司徒. 徒 means people, labors in today's meaning, and it also means the earth, the farming field in the Zhou dynasty. So this position has the duty to organize the labor, and then he also needs to ensure the harvest of the from the king's land. So this is the duty for him. And how did he do his job? He went to every family, and he has a book to record all the labors in each family, and then he will allocate it, the farming field, per the labors in each family. The record book is also very critical for the military service. Every labor for the farming field is also a qualified soldier for the king. So if there is a war, they will summon all the soldiers according to this record book. And with this book, the king would know how many soldiers he had. In the history book, 周语, there is a sentence like this, 宣王不及千亩, which means the Xuan king doesn't do this routine anymore. He doesn't let the laborers to do the farming work on his field, on his farming field. But in the reality, which means he don't have a record book on how many laborers in each family. And the most important for the king, for the country, is he don't have his troop anymore, because he don't know how many soldiers and who could be his soldiers when there is a war time. That's the way how the king summon and organize his troop. In the normal time, all those people are farmers on his farming field, and when a war came up, the king would summon and organize those farmers as his soldiers. And that's also why a decent king, a nice king, would always start his war in the autumn and winter's time, because these two seasons is of no farming work. And this theme actually continued almost through all the Chinese history until the Qing dynasty. In reality, there's quite few or maybe no decent king or emperor. So the war would never be ended within 2 seasons before the spring. So you can see so many points, so many articles complained about the lasting war, especially when the spring comes. The king, the emperor, still don't let me go back to my home, which means there is no labors in his home, and very likely they won't have a decent harvest. Very likely his father, his wife, his kids would have a famine, would go hungry, or even died by hunger. So the king's farming field, or the so-called ground farming field, is the most essential and critical things for the king as well as for the Zhou people. It's where the Zhou people lives on, and is where the power of the king came from. Okay, let's get to the first paragraph. 大田多稼，既种既借，既备乃是。The ground farming field has a great harvest this year, and then we prepared our seeds, refined, and then we have fixed and all the tools for the farming work, and then we prepared all the rest of the work for the farming field. Okay, 大田, the ground farming field, 千亩, the 1,000 mu of field, or 吉田, so this refers to the field belonged to the king. So it has a very great harvest this year, and then just after their harvest, they started to select the seeds for the next year. And 借 actually is equivalent to 谢 today. It's a long word. You can treat it as a long word, which means the tools. We can see some of the tools in the following paragraph. So there's a bunch of tools used in the farming field. 继 means have done something, have finished something. So 继种 means we have done the work to select the seeds for the next year. We have done the work to fixing all the tools. 继备 we have prepared everything. 乃 is following. 是 of course. For this poem, the thing means the farming, the harvest. So 继备乃是 we have done all the preparations for the following things, for the farming work next year. Okay, the second pair of sentences. 以我眼似，畜宰南亩，剥掘白骨。With my sharp tools, we done the farming work in the ground farming field, and then we make all kinds of seeding in the farming field. 眼 means very sharp. 似 just like the picture, is the tools to plow the farming field. So this is the first thing first in the springtime before the seeding. So they need to plow all the farming field, and then they put the seeds in the field. 剥掘白骨，掘 means that. In Chinese, 掘 means 齐。白骨 is a general term to refer all kinds of crops. And 南亩, we have talked about that in the 深南山, in the another poem, Xiaoya, 深南山, so you can check that. So basically the 南亩 means the very good quality farming field. Of course, this farming field is belong to the king. Of course, it's the best farming field in the country. 既挺且硕，曾孙势弱. The seeds became seedling, and it's up straight and big. And this pleased the king of the time. So be careful, 曾孙 in the general term means the son of the grandson, but in the poetry, the Book of Songs, it always refers to the king of Zhou, and so with this term, it's always remind that the ancestors of the Zhou, the first king of the Zhou, and then the present king always claim themselves as 曾孙. I'm the grandsons of my first king of Zhou. So it's not necessary to be the fourth generation of the king. It could be any kings in the later generations. 弱 could be interpreted in two ways. Normally, it was interpreted as pleased. So the king was pleased like this because the crops start to grow and break the surface of the earth, and it's straight upward and big. So it's like a very, very good start. So this pleased the king of Zhou. And it can also explain as the king of the present, he followed everything of their ancestors. So what does the king actually followed? So basically, he will doing a ground ceremony in the ground farming field at the very beginning in the springtime, and he will make a showcase. He will use the tool, the tool to plow the field back and forth for 3 times, and this tradition even lasts till the Qing dynasty. If you have a chance to visit Beijing, you can go to the south suburb. There is a big temple which was so-called Xiannong Tan. So Xiannong means the ancestor of the farmer. The emperor of the Qing dynasty will do a very similar procedure in this temple. He will pray to the heaven first, and then plow the field back and forth 3 times at the showcase, and then all the high-ranking officers in the central government will follow the emperor to plow the field, of course a showcase as well. All this is to for the sake for a good harvest this year. And so Xiannong basically is an alternative name of Shenong, which is more generally used today, who is a half human, half divine figure in the Chinese history, and or epic story, I should say. It's not in the real history, but everybody believes there's a sort of the figure or in the very ancient China, and he was the divine of the agriculture. With all these, let's review the first paragraph. So it gave us a very concise briefing on the farming work happened in the last autumn to the spring, this spring. So in the autumn, they have a very, very good harvest last autumn. And immediately after the harvest, they started to prepare everything needed for next year. So they are very, very diligent and disciplined people. And they fix all the tools, all kinds of tools. They carefully select all the seeds. And in the spring, they went after the big ceremony I just shared. They plow the ground farming field, and then they seeding all kinds of seeds in the ground farming field, and very quickly seedling came up, and it's very straight up forward and big ground. Everybody is so proud, especially the king of Zhou, and all the harvest from this ground farming field is for the common interest, which was put by the Zhou people. So all the expense of the for the kings for the country of the Zhou, let's see, the state affairs, wars, the big ceremonies, all the expense comes from the harvest from this farming field, of the king. Okay, the second paragraph. 既方既造，既坚既好，不狼不幼。The house of the grain started to build, and finally it was built, and the grain became more solid, and finally it was fully matured. All crops grow very well, and there is no wild grass in the farming field. Fang means the grain started to grow, and it grew the shell at the very beginning. So the shell was so treated as the house of that grain. So fang here actually is the loan word of fang, house. So 继方 means it started to build the house. So this is a very important stage when the crops grows. 造 means build, building. So 既造 means finally it was built. The shell was built already, which means the house for the grain was built. And then the grain inside started to grow. And 季间 means the grain became very solid. And finally it matured. 季好, it became matured. 不狼 means a very short junior crops. So here it means all the crops grows very well. There is no small junior crops or not growed wild plants. 有 means the wild grass. Of course, that's not expected by the farmers. They want everything in the farming field is their crops. Okay, the next sentence. 去其名特，及其毛贼，无害我田治。Let's drive out all those insects, harmful insects, and don't let them do harm to our small crops. 名特 毛贼 is 4 types of insects which do great harm to the crops. And so from here you can see the Zhou people take great care to their crops, and then of course they take great care of anything could do good or do harm to their crops. So they know very clearly what insects is good, what insects is bad to their crops. 田智, 智 means kids. 田智 means the junior, the small crops. Okay, the next sentence. 田祖有神，秉璧焰火. The ancestor of the farming field is magic, is powerful. He take and sent the hot fire to the farming field and drive out all the insects. The 田祖, the ancestor of the farming field, refers to the Shen Nong we have talked about, the half-human, half-divine figure in the Chinese history. And for Zhou people, basically, he's the god responsible for the agriculture, for the crops. And here he said, when sometimes there's a lot of the harmful insects in the farming field, the god of the agriculture would protect the Zhou people, protect their crops, protect their harvest, and send out the fires to drive out all the insects. But practically, in the reality, is the humans' task to make a lot of the bonfire in the farming fields and put the wet wood on the fire, so to make it to produce a lot of the smoke. So the smoke will finally drive away the insects, the harmful insects. So this sentence basically tells two things. The Zhou people is very diligent and they are very capable. They try their best, do all kinds of work to ensure their good harvest, and also they treat all their deeds or all their good luck is from the god of the agriculture, from Shen Nong. The second paragraph gave us a snapshot about the very critical period for the crops. The grains started to grow. You can feel the dynamic change through the words, through the characters. At the same time, the fight between the harmful insects and the farmers gave us a sense of urgency. And then the god resolved all the trouble for the Zhou people, and finally everything became peaceful and joyful. The third paragraph. 有眼戚戚，星雨齐齐. The clouds are thick. The rain is mild and slow. The mild and slow rain is the best scenario for the crops to have a good harvest. So when the grains started to grow, it needs a lot of rains, but not heavy rains. The heavy rains will do damage to the crops. So this is the best scenario. The slow and mild rain is the best scenario, best condition for the crops. In this poem, it said we had the best weather, the best scenario. We have rains and we have mild, slow rains, which basically ensured a good harvest for us. Okay, the next sentence. 与我公田，遂及我思. The rain goes to the public farming field, 公田, so a new term. 公田, most cases, is equivalent to the king's farming field. The term, we have another term, 千亩, 吉田, 大田, 福田. So it's all the alternative terms for the king's farming field. But if it's in a state, the lord, the farming field of the lord, could also be called as 公田. So 公 here is more like to refer to the public interest, not public interest, the common interest or the common farming field. So the contrast is 私, 遂及我私. So let's interpret the sentence first. 与我公田遂及我私. The rain goes to the common farming field and then to the private farming field. So it's just like killing. Even the rain knows which is the priority. In the reality, the rain, of course, don't know the setup in the Zhou society, the common farming field or the farming field of the king or the other farming field of the labors of the junior laws. So this is the concept in the Zhou people that 公 basically means the common interest, and the king represents that common interest. And the war, the ceremony for the ancestors, is all part of the common interest. And 私, the private, means the lord, the junior lords, or the laborers' families themselves. So the harvest from the private farming field will goes to the junior lord's family or the laborer's family, not to the king's warehouse. The crops from the common farming fields, they all goes to the warehouse of the king of the Zhou country. So this is quite different from the later dynasties since Qin dynasty, and it's more like today that there is no common properties or common farming field. So all the properties, all the farming field belongs to someone, a farmer, a junior lords, or anyone. And then the king taxing from everyone. So the revenue or the expense by the country, by the king, is by taxing. And in the Zhou dynasty, there is no taxing. But the Zhou king has a very big piece of land, 大田. So all the outcomes from this ground field is for him. Okay, the next sentence. 彼有不惑志，此有不敛计；彼有乙丙，此有至岁. In the farming field, the crops are left here and there. So basically the 4 sentences means the same thing. 不惑志, the small junior plants left it. 不敛计, the crops carted are left there. 乙丙, 丙 means a wrap of crops harvested and which was left in the farming field. 至岁, the heir left it in the field. So all the four sentences means when the harvest has been done, all the crops has been carted and sent to other places, but still in the farming field there's so many crops left here and there. So this is for the widows, 依寡妇之力. So all these lefted crops, small crops and a wrap of crops, an ear of crops is for the widows. Why? Because they are the most poor people in this society. They don't have a husband, so they don't have a piece of land, or they don't have the labor to do the farming work, to have a harvest for themselves. So all the crops left in the field is for those widows. So you can treat this as a very smart welfare in the Zhou society. And this tradition basically lasts till the very recent years, maybe 60 years, 80 years ago. So I have read some of the articles. So in this area, in the countryside, there is still a sort of the after-harvest activity to collect all the small pieces of crops left in the field. It's just the tradition from the Zhou dynasty. So the third paragraph tells two things. The Zhou people, the farming field was blessed by the god, so they have a very, very well arranged rains, and the rains go to the common farming field first and then go to the private farming field. So basically, this actually is telling the Zhou society was built by ordering. So when the farmers, they are about doing the farming work. Let's take an example. When they started to harvest, they should harvest the king's farming field first. And when they are finished the harvest for the kings, then they could get back to their private farming field and harvest the crops for themselves. So this sentence actually refers to the things in the human's world, not refers to the rain, refers to the things in the heaven. 与我公田，遂及我思. The rain goes to the common, to my common farming field first, and then goes to the private farming field. And then the second thing is about the welfare system of the Zhou dynasty. So by the harvesting, it looks like a very careless harvest for the Zhou people. So many pieces of crops was left in the farming field after the harvest, but actually that's the welfare system in the Zhou dynasty, and that's for the widows or the poor peoples who can go to the farming field and pick it up, so they have the food for themselves in the coming year. Okay, the fourth paragraph. 曾孙来止，以其父子，亦比南亩，田郡至喜. The king comes to the farming field with his wife and his children, and he brings all the food to the farming field. The agriculture officers come to the front and tell the good news to the king. So 曾孙, so it's very clear, it refers to the king of the present. And yi means to bring the food to the farming field, to the farmers. 田郡 is the officer in the central government who only responsible for the farming work. So 致喜, 致 means to claim, to tell. 喜 is a good news. From the previous paragraph, we know everything goes so smooth and everything is so lucky with fortune. So, of course, we will have a very, very good harvest. But finally, this good news should be confirmed and reported by the officer to the king. And this also confirms, this concluded that this is a good harvest this year. Very likely, this scenario happened in the harvest time. It's the busiest time through all the seasons, and that's the tradition for the wife of the farmer to bring the food to the farming field. There is a very, very good movie, 白鹿原. You can see a very similar scenario like this poem. The wife of the landlord, she made all the food for the farmers who are hired to help the harvesting work, and she brought the food to the farming field. And that movie also is about the stories happened near the Xi'an city, which actually is the same background, same place of this poem. 来方因寺以其心黑，于其属稷. The king made a grand ceremony to pray to the heaven, to pray to the earth, with the red bull and black pig, also with the new harvested crops. 心 refers to the red bull. 黑 refers to the black pig. And it could also be the red and black bull. It's hard to tell, nobody knows. Either way, it's a grand ceremony. The next sentence, 以享以祀，以戒景福. So they do this grand ceremony with offering, with pray, 享 offering, 祀 pray, and they beg, they ask for great fortune for the coming next year. 戒 means to beg, to ask. 景 means big, bright. 景福 means a big fortune, a good luck. So the fourth paragraph basically has about two things, or two scenario. The first is to describe the most busy time of the year, the harvest time, and the king will have some of the very special service for the farmers. He brings the food to the farming field, to the farmers. So if you are a Zhou people, of course, you would always remember this moment. You saw the king and you eat the food from the king, and you are working so hard every day. And the second scenario is sometimes after the harvest. So very likely it's the grand ceremony in the autumn, and with all the harvest and livestock, they made their offering to the heaven, to the earth, and ask for the fortune and express their grateful to the heaven, to their ancestors. And 因祀 very likely expressed two aspects. the prey to the heaven, the prey to the earth, because the heaven is positive or yang, the earth is negative or yin in Chinese. So it is also represented by the color xin, the red color, hei, the black color. Xin is positive, and hei is negative. That's the philosophy of the Zhou people, that everything is made by the combined efforts of the positive and negative, and their harvest, their crops, is by the efforts of the heaven and the earth. So when they want a good harvest, they would pray for the heaven, for the good rains, for the good weathers, and they also would pray for the earth, because it's the harvest is from the earth, right? And okay, that's for today. So the key takeaways is the ground farming field is quite significant for the Zhou people. It's not only the common interest, it's also the social structure was built, and it's also the military power came from. And that's also why this piece of land of the king has so many alternative names. So you better to be familiar with those alternative names: 福田、大田、吉田、千亩、阡陌、公田. So in the third paragraph, so there's so many alternative names. Okay, that's for today. Bye bye.